Forthwith.
Mr Speaker,
Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
That the West Coast Windblown Timber Conservation Lands Bill be now read a first time. Mr Speaker, when Cyclone Eta hit the West Coast on the 17th of April this year, it did the worst damage to forests in that region for generations, felling an estimated 20,000 hectares of forest and causing very significant damage to a further 200,000 hectares across the coast. Mr Speaker, that was a conservation tragedy, but it leaves a dilemma as to what to do with the millions of cubic metres of wood that now rests in those forests. Mr Speaker, no good purpose would be served by leaving that timber in the forest to rot, whether it be the rimu, the beech, the totara or the maitai. As the Leader of the House noted, it is somewhat ironic in this beautiful chamber, surrounded by native timbers, for people to be taking a view that is philosophically opposed to any use of our native woods. Mr Speaker, can I firstly address the very practical need for the Parliament to take urgency in this matter. A good portion of the volume of the wood is beech, particularly silver and red beech. Such timbers are very susceptible to both beech stain and to borer, and if this Parliament delays or slows, by spring that timber will not be recoverable. And that is why I say to members from New Zealand First and the Member of Parliament for West Coast Tasman that to somehow pretend that you support recovery of this wood but are not prepared to support urgency is really saying that you're not going to give the opportunity for that timber to recover before it spoils. Mr Speaker, after the storm caused the damage, the question from members opposite, why are we allowing the recovery for 5 years? Let me explain to the member Jacinda Ardern who interjects. And that is, while the beech will spoil quickly, I'm further advised that the rumu, like our desk, can be recovered for a period of up to 5 years from the forest. And in fact, the clear message I have had from both the sawmill industry and the indigenous timber industry is that it would be preferable to spread this wood over a number of years than to flood the market, a point that's been made by Damien O'Connor, and I would suggest to Jacinda Ardern that she listens to that advice. Mr Speaker, I sought careful advice from my department, who first raised the prospects of the recovery of this wood as to whether it could be done under existing legislation. And the answer is that with a great deal of complexity. Yes, it is true that, for instance, when the Department of Conservation grants a mining licence in an area where there is wood, it is possible to remove that native timber and to use it for practical purposes. But it is a complex, slow process. I had been challenged by Eugenie Sage effectively in the media to say that to do it under the existing conservation law would create uncertainty, and I came to the view that if you were to do this, it was better to be upfront with the Parliament about the extraordinary event that occurred and to provide a robust and straightforward process to enable the timber to be recovered. Mr Speaker, the West Coast Windblown Timber Conservation Lands Bill confines the recovery of the usable wood to areas that have been affected by Cyclone Eta and specifically excludes the very high conservation areas of the World Heritage areas, the 4 national parks across the West Coast, the ecological areas and the White Heron Sanctuary Reserve at Whataroa. It does include 100 forests across the coast where there has been extensive damage, and enables the Director General of Conservation to grant authorisations for the recovery of that wood. Mr. Speaker, the bill requires that the Director General needs to satisfy himself that anybody proposing to recover the timber provides a safety plan to ensure that this can be done without risk to the workers or to the public. Mr. Speaker, we only need reflect on the debate that's occurred in this House over the last year about the dangerous nature of forestry work, and the further fact that wind-blown timber makes that work even more important, that we have restrictions and we have requirements for that to be taken into account. The bill also requires that the Director General of Conservation, in granting authorisations, takes care to ensure that there is minimal environmental impact in the recovery of that timber. It is my expectation that the bulk of the timber is in fact recovered by helicopter, given the remote areas that are involved. Mr. Speaker, I want to rebut some of the concerns that have been expressed about this very practical bill. The first claim is that removing a portion of this wood will hold back the recovery of those forests. Mr. Speaker, I'd point out that only a small portion of the overall woody biomass would be recovered by this method. There will be oodles, Mr. Speaker, of wood for the bugs and the slugs to be able to consume and to be able to provide fertility for those forests to be able to recover. Mr. Speaker, I've also heard criticism from members opposite that somehow they believe that the recovery of this wood should be restricted and only available to West Coast companies. Mr. Speaker, I've heard some silly ideas in my day. That one would have to take the cake. Well, the member for Gisborne is interjecting. Does the member really believe that in little New Zealand of 4.5 million people, we're going to start setting up individual custom areas for the West Coast where wood can't be moved? I assure the member, whose party is split on this issue, as to why. Well, the member says no. Well, I've just read on the wires. Marianne Strait says they're not split. Well, can the member assure me that Damien O'Connor is not going to cross the floor of the House? Well, one minute they say they're not split, and the next minute it seems that they are. Can I be reassured by Marianne Street that Labor is voting as one on this bill? I have from very reliable sources that the Labor opposition is completely divided on this issue, as they are on the oil and gas exploration, as they were for the very reasons that Shane Jones left the Parliament. They are a party that don't know what they stand for, and I think that will become plain as this bill is debated through its stages. Mr. Speaker, in publicly making the announcement for this bill, and I want to acknowledge the support of the United Future and Maori parties last Friday, subsequent to that there has been concern expressed from some high-value oil extractors from native wood that in the provisions of the bill I tabled last week, that would restrict that sort of high-value use. Mr. Speaker, I do want to draw attention to members of the House that there is a small change to the bill in that regard, for the purposes of which the timber can be recovered as part of being open and transparent with the House about the content of this bill. Mr. Speaker, it's right that this Parliament is passionate about protecting the forests that define this country. But, Mr. Speaker, when we have a tragedy of this scale and we have millions of hectares of high-value timber on the ground, it is my view that this Parliament should be pragmatic and this Parliament should allow that wood to be recovered where it can be done environmentally responsibly and where it can be done safely. Mr. Speaker, to put it very quickly, this country is not so wealthy that it can allow beautiful, valuable native timber to be left to rot.
I call the Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Thank you very much,
Tēnā
Mr.
koe, Ms.
Speaker.
Dyson.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker.